I never thought my life would unravel in a single afternoon, but that's exactly what happened the day my children came to my house with their practiced smiles and clipped voices. They told me it was time for me to transition, as if I were a piece of furniture being moved from one room to another. I had woken up early that morning hopeful. My daughter Karen had called promising to come by with my sons David and Luke to help me organize. I even set out 4 cups of coffee on the kitchen table where I had once braided their hair, checked homework, and sliced birthday cakes. I wore my pink sweater, the one George always said brought out my cheeks, and touched up my lipstick in the toaster reflection like a silly schoolgirl wanting to look nice for her own family. When the door slammed open, the air shifted. Karen walked in brisk, lips tight, in that way they always were when she was lying. David trailed behind her, absorbed in his phone. Luke followed last, clutching papers that already made my stomach turn. They sat at my table, as if it no longer belonged to me. Karen's voice was syrupy, patronizing. She explained that they'd found a wonderful facility, describing it like some vacation resort. I stared at them in disbelief and told them calmly that I wasn't leaving my home. But Luke slid the papers across the table, citing my forgetfulness, claiming they only wanted to protect me. I could feel the betrayal, like a knife, twisting in my chest. Karen leaned closer, soft but sharp. "Mom, you already signed the power of attorney papers." I froze. I didn't even remember signing them. Maybe I had been tired, maybe confused after my fall last year. I had trusted them, my babies, the ones I worked 2 jobs to raise after George died, and they used that trust against me. Within the hour, my bags were packed. They didn't even let me choose which photos to take. Just one suitcase, and my house of decades was gone. The ride to the nursing home was quiet, thick with guilt, none of them admitted. David drove. Karen tapped away on her phone, and Luke sat beside me, refusing to meet my eyes. "Mom, you'll love it there. They have bingo nights and movie screenings," he muttered, like he was convincing himself. The facility was beige and lifeless, wedged between a gas station and a dry cleaner. The nurse who greeted us wore a smile that stretched too wide. That night, lying on a thin mattress, I pressed my pillow to my face and cried, not for the cold sheets or bland food, but because my children no longer saw me as a person, only as a burden to be moved out of their way. It took weeks before the anger ebbed. I observed in silence, watching staff stretched too thin and residents who looked like ghosts waiting out their days. And then, I noticed Ruth playing poker in the common room, laughing so loud it startled me. She caught my eye and grinned. "You're new," she said. "And you've got that freshly betrayed look about you." For the first time in weeks, I laughed, and in that moment, she pulled me into her circle. Soon, I met Dory, sweet as pie but sharp-eyed, a former librarian who saw everything, and Maxine, tall and commanding, once a law professor before her hip gave out. We started sitting together at meals, playing cards at night, telling stories that stitched our broken spirits. One evening, I confessed my story, the betrayal, the house. Maxine raised an eyebrow. "Did you sign over the deed?" My hands shook as I whispered no. Ruth whistled low. "Then, honey, you've got gold under your feet." It was a spark. Later, while unpacking, I discovered my old leather folio. Inside was the deed to my house, still in my name. They hadn't taken everything, not yet. The sight of it brought a flood of rage and clarity. My children wanted to sell it, profit off my life, but I still had the power. I prayed that night, not for strength, but for a sign. And in the days that followed, with Maxine's legal knowledge, Ruth's stubborn energy, and Dory's knack for organization, we began to plot. The plan grew quietly. Using the public computer, we created email accounts, made phone calls through old contacts, and listed the house discreetly. A buyer appeared almost instantly. The neighborhood was hot, and young families wanted in. Within weeks, the house sold for full asking price. The funds were wired to a new account in my name hidden from my children. I felt like I was waking from a long drugged sleep. I had been discarded, but now I was reborn with fire in my chest. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, widow, mother, survivor, and I was not done yet. The night of our escape was chosen with care. Friday evenings at the facility meant bingo in the rec room, and the staff were always distracted. Ruth bribed a young aide with perfume and pizza to skip her nightly rounds, while Maxine handled the paperwork with her old lawyer friend Jack Winston. Dory set up our travel documents using the communal computer, her librarian patience proving invaluable with the finicky Wi-Fi. I packed a single suitcase, slipped my passport into my coat pocket, and left a note on my bed. Don't look for me. I've gone to find the life you stole. We slipped into an Uber with sticky seats and broken air conditioning, but to me, it felt like a chariot. At the airport, the fluorescent lights seemed like salvation. Our first stop was Rome. I hadn't been on a plane in 2 decades, but as the wheels lifted and Texas disappeared beneath me, I pressed my forehead to the window and smiled through tears I refused to shed. I wasn't anyone's burden anymore. I was free. Rome was everything I'd dreamed: cobblestone streets, flower boxes spilling over balconies, music drifting from fountains. We checked into a modest pension where the sheets were clean and the morning bread still warm. Ruth haggled with street vendors, Dory bought postcards she never mailed, and Maxine flirted shamelessly with a cafe owner who sent us free tiramisu. As for me, I stood before the Colosseum with wind on my face and felt alive for the first time in years. But freedom carries ghosts. On our 3rd night, I opened my email, curiosity gnawing at me. 10 unread messages from Karen waited. The subject line of the latest, "What have you done?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Her voice echoed in my head, shocked and furious. They had discovered the house was sold. The money was gone. And so was I. I found Maxine on the terrace and admitted I felt no guilt, only surprise at my lack of it. She lit a cigarette and exhaled slow. "They had a choice," she said. "They chose themselves. You just chose you back." Her words stayed with me as we boarded trains to Florence and Venice, then drifted south to Portugal. Each city became a balm, but Florence changed me most. Inside the Duomo, beneath a ceiling painted with heaven and hell, I thought of George. I thought of the promises we made and how he would have wanted me to fight. That night, unpacking, I found a manila folder tucked deep in my suitcase. Inside were 6 letters in George's familiar hand. He had written them in the years before his death, confessions of his growing fears. He had seen the entitlement in our children, the way they manipulated the whispers of Luke, suggesting maybe it was time for me to move out, long before I showed any decline. In his last letter, dated weeks before his heart gave out, he wrote, "Ellie, if you're reading this, I hope I was wrong. But if they turn on you, if you're alone, remember, you are worth more than they make you believe. Fight back. You've always been stronger than me." I wept with those letters clutched to my chest. He had known. Even then, he had known. The next morning, I shared everything with the girls. Ruth slapped the table. "Then we raise hell." Maxine leaned close. "I know someone in media. We tell your story, all of it." Dory nodded softly. "Others need to hear it too. You're not alone." And so, our secret rebellion became a mission. Jack Winston helped draft a detailed account, and Maxine sent it to a journalist named Megan Luce, host of a syndicated podcast that reached millions. Within days, Megan replied, eager to meet. While we waited, we traveled. We walked Venetian canals, tasted Lisbon pastries, and for once, our laughter felt unshackled. But the past wasn't done with me. On a quiet beach in Portugal, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a trembling voice said, "Grandma, it was Emily, my youngest granddaughter, nearly grown at 16. Tears cracked her words as she explained she had read George's letters, listened to the podcast, and wanted to find me. I just want to talk. Please. The call ended with my heart hammering. That night on the terrace, Ruth cautioned me not to be fooled. Maxine warned it could be another trick. But I couldn't shake the memory of Emily as a child following me in the garden, drawing me pictures I still kept. Maybe she was different. Maybe she wasn't. 2 days later, she sent a photo of my old house. The porch was stripped, the roses gone, the shutters painted dull beige. Underneath, she wrote, "They trashed it." I'm sorry. My throat closed. The children hadn't just sold the house, they had erased me from it. Maxine looked at the picture, then tossed her cigarette into the wind. It's time, she said. We go public. The interview with Megan Luce took place in a small cafe overlooking the Douro River. She carried no makeup, no entourage, just a backpack of recording equipment and a warmth that melted my defenses. Tell me everything, she said, and I did. I told her about the years of sacrifice, the nights spent working double shifts, the birthdays I stretched with pennies and prayers. I told her how my children turned cold, how they escorted me out of my own home like unwanted furniture. When I finished, she held my hand and whispered, "You're not alone. You have no idea how many women have lived this, but yours will open eyes." The podcast aired a week later and exploded across the country. Hundreds of thousands listened. Messages poured in, mothers betrayed grandmothers, discarded children who regretted their silence. I became a symbol not by choice, but by survival. Karen sent a venomous message, Luke called with threats, David left a drunken voicemail. I deleted them all, but then Emily reached out again. She had left home, she said, staying with an aunt. She couldn't live under her mother's roof after what she had learned. Please, she begged, I just want to know you again. My friends were divided. Maxine warned against it, Ruth said voices could lie, and Dory quietly urged me to consider that healing sometimes required opening one more door. Against my fears, I agreed. We chose Savannah, Georgia, a city I'd always wanted to see, where magnolia trees draped like ghosts over the squares. Emily was waiting on a park bench under a mossy oak, eyes brimming when she spotted me. She looked so much like her mother once had, but softer, searching. "Hi, Grandma," she said. My throat nearly closed, but I managed, "Hi, sweetheart." We walked for hours, her questions tumbling out about George, my childhood, that terrible day I was taken. She confessed she found the letters in Karen's cabinet, confronted her mother, and was slapped for it. "I couldn't stay after that," she whispered. Looking at her, half a girl, half a woman, something inside me cracked. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted restoration, if only through her. I pulled her into my arms and left fingerprints on her soul. That week, Emily joined us for dinners, for walks by the river, for stories under the stars. It was awkward, then beautiful. One evening, she turned to me with a fire in her young eyes. "What if we started something? A place for women like you, like us?" I didn't answer at first, but the next morning over coffee, I said, "We're going to build it." The Eleanor Grace Foundation was born over pancakes in a Savannah diner scribbled on a napkin decorated with Emily's looping handwriting. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about protecting women abandoned by the very families they gave everything to. Emily had a sharp mind, quick to learn. She registered the foundation, built the website, contacted advocates, and launched a GoFundMe that went viral. Thousands donated with messages like, "This happened to my mom, thank you for speaking out." We began with a pilot program in Savannah, a legal clinic once a week, resource packets mailed to nursing homes, support groups run on Zoom. Soon, the media came calling, CNN, NPR, Newsweek. I declined most of them. I wasn't a spectacle. I was a woman who had survived. But one local interview aired a simple question. If you could say one thing to the children who put you in that home, what would it be? I looked into the camera and said steadily, "I forgive you, but I will never forget who I became because of you." The clip went everywhere. Karen broke her silence with another voicemail. I never listened. Luke tried to sue me, claiming I'd stolen the house. The judge dismissed it in 10 minutes. David moved out of state and disappeared. Emily, though, stayed. She became my shadow, my star. Together, we opened our first foundation house in upstate New York, a 5-bedroom haven for displaced women. We named it Grace House. At the ribbon cutting, my knees buckled with tears, Ruth held me upright, and I realized this wasn't just about saving me. It was about saving others. The years that followed bloomed like a garden. Ruth found love on a cruise ship with a widower named Dennis. Dory started a poetry blog that spread across the world. Maxine became our legal director, striding into court in red lipstick and leaving judges trembling. And me, I traveled, I told my story, and I fought. The Eleanor Grace Foundation grew beyond anything I imagined. But the true healing came one night at sea. On a cruise we took together, the band began to play an old Ella Fitzgerald tune, and for the first time in decades, I rose to dance. Alone at first, then joined by strangers, until the ballroom swayed like a tide. Emily whispered, "After you looked like you were flying." And I smiled through tears. I was. For the first time in my life, I wasn't dancing for anyone else. Alaska was the chapter I never expected. From the deck of the cruise ship, we watched cherry blossoms fall in Seattle before sailing into icy waters and jagged peaks. Emily and I booked a helicopter tour, both of us terrified of heights but determined to see the world from above. The pilot, a woman with a gravel voice and steady hands, lifted us over glaciers that shimmered like rivers of glass. For a moment, the vast silence swallowed everything: pain, betrayal, fear. I pulled George's last letter from my coat pocket, the one I'd carried like a stone in my chest, and let it go into the wind. It fluttered across the ice and vanished. It was time to stop carrying the weight. That evening, Ruth toasted with champagne, Dennis at her side, Dory read a poem about second chances, and Maxine winked over her martini glass. We clinked our glasses together. "To beginnings," Emily said, and for the first time in decades, I believed her. When the cruise ended, I knew running was over. We gathered in the ship's lounge for a small ceremony, lighting candles for the women we had lost, for the versions of ourselves we had once been. I told them my truth, that fire, even smothered, will burn again, if protected long enough. I announced that I was ready to build something permanent, a headquarters for the foundation, not just a shelter, but a home. Savannah felt like the right place. Where Emily had found me, where hope had returned. 6 months later, Grace Haven opened its doors. A white 2-story house with green shutters and a wide porch, it embraced every woman who crossed its path. Emily became executive director, Maxine handled legal battles, Ruth and Dennis hosted supper clubs, and Dory ran writing workshops. I sat on that porch every morning with coffee in hand, watching women arrive bent and bruised, only to leave standing taller, lighter. Grace Haven was alive with laughter, tears, and healing. Our first Thanksgiving was unforgettable. 22 women sat around a long table, the air thick with cinnamon-roasted turkey and cornbread. Some wore pearls, others jeans, but all wore hope. Olivia, who escaped a marriage of silence after 35 years. Harriet, abandoned by her son after he drained her savings. Rosa, 71, learning to read for the first time, leaving sticky notes around the house with her favorite new words, light, soft beginning. I raised my glass and said simply, "This year, I didn't lose everything. I found everything I was missing. Family not by blood, but by choice. Purpose in the ashes of pain. This isn't just a home for the broken, it's a home for the rising." Winter in Savannah arrived gently with pine and clove on the breeze and string lights draped across Grace Haven. Every room held a story. Clara left in a motel after her children stole her savings, found peace in the garden. Naomi, a nurse forced into assisted living against her will, now led yoga classes each morning, teaching us all how to breathe again. Each new arrival was a reflection of who I once was, a suitcase at her feet, faith slipping through her hands. And each time I welcomed one in, I grew stronger. One evening, we held a night of names, standing in a circle with candles each, honoring a woman we'd lost, or a version of ourselves we'd left behind. When it came to me, I said Eleanor Grace Miller, the one who stayed too quiet for too long. I let the silence stretch. Not grief, but respect. That woman deserved to be remembered too. Emily approached me afterward, her eyes shining. I want to write a book, she said. About you. About all of this. Women need to know it's never too late. So I began scribbling in a spiral notebook, memories, lessons, truths no one tells you until it's nearly too late. In February, unexpected news arrived. The foundation had been nominated for a national award, the Women of Strength Legacy Grant. When the acceptance letter came, we cried and danced around the kitchen table. It wasn't just the money, though it meant we could open 3 more Grace Havens. It was the words, "We honor you." No one had ever said that to me before. At our celebration, 100 women filled the garden, hugging, singing, crying. They crowned me with a flower wreath Ruth had made from daisies and ivy. I wore it like a queen, not because I ruled, but because I had risen. That night, I spoke to George aloud for the first time in years. I did it, I whispered. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew. Spring in Savannah arrived with blossoms curling around the porch railings of Grace Haven daffodils bursting like trumpets of hope. The house smelled of fresh bread and laughter. Emily's book idea had bloomed into reality. We called it Not Done Yet. She took my stories, George's letters, and the voices of the women we'd met, weaving them into a testimony of resilience. At the launch party, the garden shimmered with lights. Women gathered from across the country, some with families, some alone, all carrying their own fire. Karen and David stayed silent. Luke sent a bitter legal threat that went nowhere. But Emily's father came with flowers, thanking me softly for giving her back stronger. I knew then that the wounds of the past no longer ruled me. That night, after the guests departed, I sat on the porch and let myself remember everything. The pain, yes, but also the love. George's laughter, the children I held, the long nights I endured, the fight I eventually found. Maxine joined me, a blanket over her knees. You did it, you rewrote the ending, she said. I shook my head. No, I just started telling the truth. She chuckled, and for the first time I felt fully at peace. I was no longer waiting to be chosen or forgiven. I was here whole, and my story belonged to me. The foundation flourished. Another Grace Haven opened in Asheville, then one in Michigan, with Oregon planned for the fall. Every new home carried a piece of our fight, a spark of the fire we refused to let die. Women arrived with trembling hands and broken voices, and they left with light in their eyes. Each time I whispered the same words, "You are not lost. You're just getting started." On the first anniversary of Grace Haven, we hosted a Thanksgiving feast. The table was long and mismatched the food donated by neighbors, the air filled with songs sung off-key, but from the heart. 22 women sat side by side, laughing through tears. I looked around and realized this was my true legacy, not the house my children stole, not the years they erased, but the fire I had passed on to others who now carried it forward. When winter came, Emily and I sat together in the kitchen. She was typing late into the night, drafting new programs, responding to emails from thousands of women who had written for help. You turned ashes into light, she said one evening, resting her head on my shoulder. I kissed her hair and whispered, "No, sweetheart, we did." Months later, when we received the Women of Strength Legacy Grant, over 100 women gathered in our garden to celebrate. They crowned me with flowers, sang songs, and told stories of survival. As lanterns floated into the night sky, I realized something powerful. This wasn't a second chance at life. It was life finally lived, as it was always meant to be. Now each morning I sit on the porch with coffee in hand, the scent of roses drifting in the breeze, and I remember who I am. I am not the woman discarded in a beige nursing home. I am Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, grandmother, widow, survivor, founder, fighter. My children may have tried to bury me, but I rose anyway. And for every woman who feels forgotten, I leave this truth: you are not too old, not too late, and not done yet. So if my story touched you, let it remind you that no matter what you've lost, you can rise again, stronger than before. If you believe more women need to hear stories like mine, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and comment below to tell me where you're watching from, because your voice matters too.